Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are covering the third Call of Duty League major. It's in the books. The Toronto major is over, and the Seattle Surge have won their first title in the CDL's history. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna go bit by bit because you've been a big believer of the Seattle Surge and their process this year, but this comes as a surprise nonetheless. But before we get to do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It was a super entertaining event. As you kind of hinted at there, I have been a bit of a believer in Seattle, but even I don't think I was thinking they were pulling this one off. So we can get into that, but yeah, it was certainly a entertaining weekend of Call of Duty.
Certainly. Seattle actually kicked off the event. They played the first match of the tournament. They played the New York Subliners in the winners bracket, and they ended up winning 3-2. I don't think that came as big of a surprise to us because I don't think either one of us are big New York Subliners believers. Even after a good Pro-Am Classic win and a little bit of potential being shown in the last set of qualifying matches, but Seattle, they take this 3-2 and move on to the second round of the tournament, and they did not have an easy path. I think the first two rounds, to be expected sometimes, are quote unquote easy, but OpTic lost to the Florida Mutineers in round one, which I think would have been the obvious choice for if the Seattle Surge were able to beat New York. You would think, okay, they're probably going to play OpTic in the second round, considering OpTic played Florida in the first round. But OpTic playing with Prolu again in place of Illy, they drop, and Seattle end up having to play Florida, which they end up beating Florida. Do you think this would have changed at all the result for Seattle had they played OpTic in the second round instead of Florida?
I mean, it's hard to say because Florida did beat OpTic, and we've seen it's not like this was a one-time thing either. We saw, I believe, Florida eliminated OpTic from Major 2.
I believe so.
I know they beat them at Major 2, but I'm pretty sure it was an elimination match. Regardless, though, we've seen Florida beat OpTic before with Illy, now without Illy. So you could say maybe on paper the OpTic matchup for Seattle is a little tougher. I think they've probably matched up a couple times this year just off the top of my head, and I don't know if Seattle has actually beaten them. But regardless, I mean, a trend, something that I might bring up a couple times throughout this show is it's really Vanguard. Call of Duty throughout its entire competitive history people have said it's like a day-to-day game, and I think Vanguard, just the nature of the game itself, lends to that possibly more than even some previous Call of Duty games. So if Seattle comes out firing and they're playing top of their game on that given day, I don't know if it really matters what team they're playing against, because as we see eventually later in this tournament, they beat the most consistent team throughout this year so far in Atlanta FaZe, and they beat them twice. So yeah, I guess that's a roundabout way of answering your question, but I don't know for sure if the OpTic matchup would have changed anything.
To illustrate your point about how Vanguard is going to Vanguard and things can be very different based off of just a few weeks. So OpTic and Seattle have met 3 times this season. Once at Major 1, Seattle lost 3-0 to OpTic. Then they played in the qualifying matches of Major 2. OpTic won 3-1 online, so you can take that as you will. Then they played again in Major 2, and Seattle beat OpTic 3-0. So they've met twice on LAN, and they've swept each other once. and they haven't met since. So it's kind of hard to determine which of these teams is better. But one thing that we've seen consistently through this season is that Atlanta FaZe, for the most part, has been one of the best teams in the entire league, but they've struggled primarily with two teams in particular, the Seattle Surge and OpTic Texas. And I looked this up after the tournament. Atlanta has lost 9 matches this season. 7 have come against Seattle or OpTic. And if you include the kickoff and the Pro-Am Classics, that's actually 9. They have 11 total losses, and 9 are to Seattle and OpTic. I just thought it was interesting. I don't know what the reason for that is. I could see it with OpTic. OpTic is a really talented roster and probably have the most talent in the league, maybe with Atlanta. But I see why OpTic would be a very big obstacle for Atlanta. I don't know why Seattle is such an obstacle for Atlanta. Like, if you look at it on paper, Atlanta has a much more talented roster. They have a lot more chemistry, obviously, because they've been together. This is going to be 2 complete years with this roster, and most of this roster was part of that inaugural CDL season. So I don't really know what it is. I mean, is it really? What is it?
Nicky D.
I was about to say it, but I wanted you to get it in. I mean, maybe just his presence, his aura on the stage, Atlanta gets all clammy and they can't do their jobs. But I mean, it would make sense. Like nothing else makes sense to me, at least, why Seattle would have Atlanta's number in particular when they've been middle of the road for most of the season.
Nicky D jokes aside, there really shouldn't be a logical reason. I mean, one thing we could point out is Sib was a sub for Atlanta. I don't think there's any I just because of the nature of Atlanta not necessarily needing subs. I don't think he would have been too close to the system or anything like that. I guess that's just worth pointing out. But as we say, just talented as FaZe is, like the young guys there on Seattle are super talented as well. I don't think I would have to really think about if we were just doing like a quote unquote talent power rankings for these teams. I don't know how far apart I would have Atlanta or FaZe, but just Sib and Pred, so they were so hyped up coming into this year. Mac probably didn't play as well in Cold War. He had his moments for sure, but he really stood out in Modern Warfare. And then just accuracies that, steady veteran IGL trying to, direct the troops. So yeah, I really don't I don't think that certainly in my opinion, you can't say Seattle is more talented than FaZe. But whatever the reason might be, just on that day of Vanguard, you can say they were the better team. But as you pointed out with the stats, there have been several days where Seattle has been the better team than Atlanta. So it's certainly interesting.
Yeah, and the reason I bring up Atlanta is because Seattle, they beat Florida, and then they move on and they play FaZe in the winners bracket finals. So FaZe's run up to the winners bracket final was a 3-1 win over Toronto, not very surprising. A 3-0 over LA Thieves. Not surprising that they would 3-0 Thieves, but it was surprising that Thieves were there, considering LAT ended up upsetting Minnesota, who had previously went unbeaten with this roster in qualifying matches. So the Thieves, they eke out a Game 5 victory against Minnesota. They advance to winners bracket round 2. FaZe sweeps them, and then they get to the winners finals, Seattle versus FaZe, and Seattle comes away with a 3-2 victory. I just looked up the stats while you were talking because I wanted to see if there was a disparity between game modes. Maybe Seattle was doing very well in control as they have been recently, or maybe they had taken more hard points, and I didn't know what it was. There isn't really anything. Okay, so they faced off 4 times. I'm not including the Pro-Am or the Kickoff Classic because they don't count toward the points. So they faced off 4 times in the regular season. Seattle was 3-1 in those series. but they're only 13-10 in the maps. So they have a 56% or 57% win percentage. And 3 of these series have went to game 5. And then obviously that 4th series was a 9-game series, or a best of 9 that went 8 games. So I don't like, could it be possible that like FaZe, if I think it's possible that FaZe in Seattle, if they meet again, or if they meet in at champs or something, that there's a very real possibility that FaZe could beat them like 2 or 3 times, because we're literally getting down to game 5s, and we've talked about how inconsistent Vanguard could be. Maybe FaZe is kind of getting unlucky a little bit. Like you can't get, it's not all luck, but I think it might play a little bit of a factor because of how close these series have been. And I don't see like a real, I don't know, like I don't see anything that pops off the page about like why FaZe would be struggling with Seattle in particular.
Well, skipping ahead to that winners finals there, I firmly believe Atlanta should have won that series.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to say they choked, but they kind of did. It was more Seattle just super clutched up. In particular, Atlanta wins the Bokage Hardpoint 250 to 203. They win Berlin Search 6-5. I think Varsity's got an ace in round 11. That could be a different match I'm thinking of, but I think that's that one in particular. So they were up 2-0 in the series. Then the control goes 2-2 to overtime. Seattle is on offense on Tuscan, and they just like Omega clutched up. Like, if I'm remembering correctly, it was down to the lives. They only had 4 or 5 lives left, and they got like 3 down on FaZe, and they all just hopped on the point to speed cap it, and they won. So that's Atlanta gained some momentum, or sorry, Seattle gained some momentum there. Then it goes to Tuscan Hardpoint game 4 in the series, and it's 250 to 245 for another comeback. I don't remember the exact number or points for the comeback, but it was another game where Atlanta were ahead. I remember, now that I'm thinking about it, it was like, I think FaZe had 239 to like 200 or something like that, and it was on P5 on Tuscan in that like little side building over by BS&D, and like I'm pretty sure Crone tweeted it, like that Sib threw like a cross map nade to get the guy who's on scrap time out of there, and from that point on, like Seattle was just able to get win their gunfights and stay in the P1 hill. On Tuscan to get another comeback, and then from there it pretty much, like, after 2 impressive comebacks back to back like that with a reverse sweep on the line, you basically have all momentum, and they were able to close out in the game 5 search on Desert Siege. So that was definitely a very entertaining series, but it was one that I think was definitely winnable for Atlanta. It was just really good job by Seattle to clutch up, especially with a spot in the finals on the line there.
And then they do get the grand finals. So Seattle, because they beat FaZe, they move on to the grand finals. FaZe drops down to the losers bracket, and they have to beat Toronto, who makes an incredible run through the losers bracket with their home crowd. So they lost that opening match against FaZe in the winners bracket round 1. And then they go down the losers bracket. They beat Paris. They beat Minnesota. They sweep the Rocker. So the Rocker end up going 1-2 at the major after going 5-0 in these qualifying matches. Toronto then sweeps Florida, and then they beat LAT to get to the losers bracket finals, to face FaZe again. Unfortunately, they aren't able to, kind of repeat what the Gorillas did at the second major and make it to the grand finals all the way from the beginning of the losers bracket. They fall short, lose game 5. The crowd there was insane. They were all over Toronto. They were trying to will their guys to victory, and it was a really sad thing to see. Bance and Cammy, they're all just like super sad because they were very, very close to have pull off this upset and get to the grand finals in front of their home crowd. But an incredible run from them. But FaZe, they lock in a spot in the grand finals, and they get to their third consecutive majors grand finals. The first one, they lost to OpTic. Second one, lost to the Gorillas. Third one, they lose to the Seattle Surge. And this one went 8 games, so a pretty close series regardless. But I just want to point out, like, Seattle, they they have, I don't know what it is, like, they just have it. Maybe it's accuracy's ice just rubbing off on everybody, but they have a pretty close Bokich hardpoint to start off the series. Won a round 11 Bokich S&D, and then they dominate control 3-0 to go up 3 nothing. FaZe kind of storms back. They get 2 of their own, and then a Berlin control round 5, and Seattle clutches up again, and they're able to close it out in game 8 after losing Search. But I can't get over the fact that in my brain, FaZe is the best or second best team in the world, and Seattle is not the best or second best team in the world. That's in my brain because I've been so used to just like, all right, FaZe is gonna win, or they're gonna lose to OpTic, or they're gonna lose to Toronto or something like that. Now that Seattle, they've shown that they're not infallible, like they're not completely dominant in any single game mode right now, but they're able to win every single game mode when needed. Like in this series, they literally won all 3 game modes consecutively, and then lost hardpoint and search, and then just won control, lost search again, and they're like, all right, we'll finish it out on a hardpoint. I think that's amazing. What do you see as like the ceiling for this team? Because like they're not bad in any game mode, so they have a chance, I believe, in every series now, even with OpTic or FaZe. What do you think is the ceiling for Seattle? Do you think they could be a championship contender at the end of the year, in the playoffs and go into champs?
I mean, you have to give them credit as the most recent major champion to say that their ceiling is they have the potential to win Major 4 and champs. But it's certainly worth mentioning that, kind of like you said, and we talked about consistency earlier, that now Atlanta has placed second in all 3 majors, and all 3, although they've had came in second at those 3 majors, the eventual winner of each major is different. So that means they faced a different opponent in all 3 of the grand finals.
Mm-hmm.
And just the other placings seem to be all over the place. Like, one thing I know, not putting too much stock into the Pro-Am Classic, but Seattle in particular struggled at the Pro-Am Classic. They went 0-3 in group stage, and they lost to like Silly's team in group play there at the Pro-Am Classic, and then they turn around and they're winning a major here, right? And then on the other side of that too, you got New York winning that Pro-Am Classic with their new roster, and then they get last place at this tournament. So sorry, that just speaks to Vanguard again. Vanguard's gonna Vanguard, but regardless of FaZe not having the ultimate result that they want, just 3 second places is pretty impressive, especially when you compare it to some of these other teams that have won events and then also have last place finishes, or just have a disparity there in their finishes. But yeah, for the ceiling question, I think it is worth, you got to give Seattle credit there and say they have the potential to win these events. But under that same logic, so does the Gorillas and OpTic when OpTic's healthy. And yeah, I think that's just gonna come down to who's playing the best version of Vanguard that they can at that certain moment of the tournament. I will also say, just, I don't know, because we were kind of talking about the grand finals. I don't know if we're going to go into more detail about it, but for me, I was super surprised watching the grand finals that Seattle was able to jump out to a 3-0 lead in the series, especially the map one was Bokich Hardpoint, which was a map that Atlanta had won earlier in the day against Seattle in their first winners bracket showdown. So I was pretty surprised by that. But then, Atlanta being the team that they are, that they started, it really looked like they were starting to rattle off a couple maps there, and then they actually win. They win the map for Berlin Hardpoint, but they take Desert Siege Search and Destroy 6-3, which is the Search and Destroy that they lost to Seattle earlier in the day in the game 5. So I see that, and in my head, I'm like, okay, here we go. This is, Atlanta could easily rattle off 5 maps here and, just take this thing. And they go up 2-0 in the Berlin control, and that was the turning point for me, where Atlanta ends up losing that map 3-2 after having a 2-0 lead and after winning 2 maps prior to that Berlin control. If they are able to close out that Berlin control, it's a 3-3 series heading into a Tuscan search, which they end up taking. They still have momentum. It could have been a different story, but that was really the turning point for me in that grand finals.
Yeah, and Atlanta, not only did they beat Seattle on Bokich Hardpoint earlier in the day, but Bokich is arguably their best hardpoint map. So they're, even with that loss, they're 12-4 on Bokich Hardpoint this season. They're also a really good Gavutu Hardpoint team. So I mean, like, they're a pretty good hardpoint team in general. That's kind of how it works. But I think that's really impressive. I mean, I guess Bokich is also Seattle's best hardpoint team, but overall they have a losing record in hardpoint this season because they're literally 0-7 on Gavutu, so it's not surprising that they ended up not playing Gavutu in this this best of 9 series. That was the basically one map they were like, yeah, we probably don't want to play them on because that's like an instant loss for us. I think Seattle, like, they maybe the reason why they're able to beat FaZe is that they match up well. Like, Atlanta's strengths are also kind of Seattle's strengths, and vice versa, obviously. The things that Atlanta might not be great at, like, they're not a great search team this year. They're about a 50-50 team in search. And Seattle is a little bit better in search. They're not like world beaters or anything, but they're serviceable enough. They're gonna get the job done. And whether it's kind of a myth or it's overblown or a meme or something, accuracy seems to find a way to win searches. Like, his teams don't typically choke these very close, like, round 11 search games, and I think you have to take that and say, like, all right, maybe it is something, maybe his presence or just his leadership has been able to guide these guys to these wins, because they had multiple round 11s in this tournament, and I don't know what the record is, but they seem to win pretty much all of them, which is how you win championships. If it gets down to that, that's how you're going to be able to take championships and win matches that people don't give you credit for or think you can. But yeah, I'm just super impressed by Seattle. I'm still kind of stunned that we saw a team that before this tournament they had not even, like, the and this is including previous iterations, but they had never finished above 3rd place at a CDL event, and that's home series events when there were only 8 teams there. That's we've had several lands since then, and they didn't even qualify for champs last year. Of course, this is a completely different roster, completely different coaching staff. Everything is different. But I think that speaks to how great of a job that the Surge have done in rebuilding their franchise after being one of, if not the worst team in the CDL for the past 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, slightly joking here, but it is worth noting that 2 franchises that have been at the bottom in both previous seasons of the CDL, the LA Gorillas and Seattle Surge, have now won a championship in Vanguard. So by that logic, might want to put your money on Paris Legion to take Major 4.
Or the Vegas Legion to win champs 2023.
But yeah, kidding aside, I think, we've talked about Seattle at length on this podcast in past episodes and stuff in regard to, like, their roster construction and all that. And obviously, like you said, totally different, uh, set up new GM, new coach, new everything for them this year. So regardless of this result, I feel like they just obviously they're happy they won.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta believe, and without talking to them, I could be wrong here, but I gotta believe like building this team. I mean, I know there was preseason hype and stuff for them, like even
Yeah.
before the year started. Like a lot of people were excited about what they could do in scrims and all that, but like building a young team like this entering the season, I don't know if they like had a win now mentality. I in my eyes, viewing at the roster, it was more of like that they're signing these rookies and seeing what they have, and obviously they're super talented rookies. Pred winning MVP, and Sib has been in Rookie of the Year conversations now. Obviously, with Pred having an MVP over him, it's going to be kind of tough for him to eclipse him in that rookie standings in my eyes. But if I, it's weird because there's not like draft picks on the line as we've talked about before,
Mm-hmm.
so it's weird to say that these teams aren't in like a win now mentality, but like as close to like I don't know. It's tough.
I get what you're saying though,
Um,
because Seattle was so bad the last 2 years
yeah,
that any improvement or like a little bit of competition getting into the middle of the standings table, which they've been basically in the middle of the pack for pretty much the entire season, and maybe a little bit lower depending on how they're doing. But I think just like being able to win matches, and I mean this is the best possible outcome for them, is to like win titles. The
oh
best
yeah,
possible outcome would be win champs or something. But like I have to agree with you that it's a great result for them, but they would have taken probably lesser results and just like progress toward, improving, maybe like building a culture that is like able to win matches and to be good. I think the same with the Gorillas, like having that title, having something that you can actually look at, you can hold, you can put in your trophy case and be like, all right, like we see that there is proof that something that we're doing is working, and whether or not like it'll continue to work is dependent on what we do from here on out. But I think that Seattle and LAG, those teams deserve a lot of credit for even putting their rosters in a position where they could win championships. Uh,
yeah.
and and Seattle is, like they have a very real chance to win the CDL championship if they're able to just like maintain what they've been doing this past month or so.
That's the big thing is it's going to be about if they're able to hit that level of consistency. Like this is you mentioned the ceiling. Like this is obviously as high as it can go at this current moment. And I would have to look at the exact stats here before I say it. Um, but just looking at the grand finals, KDs in general, they had Pred with a 1.24 and Sib with a 1.11. Both were the highest in the grand finals. Celium was third with a 1.08. Um, like that's what you want from your young duo there in Sib and Pred if you're Seattle. But now it comes down to if and how are they going to be able to continually like getting a 1.2 plus from Pred is on a consistent basis in a grand finals. It's probably asking a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
like how comparatively or relatively close to that, the main idea I'm thinking about right now is if Seattle is going to try to continue to compete throughout the rest of the year for more championships, it's going to come down to if and how close that duo can get to consistently performing at just an above expectations is not what I meant to say, but whatever, it works.
Uh, consistency consistency has been the biggest thing for Seattle, because
Yeah.
they started off the season, like you mentioned, they had a lot of hype. People had pretty high expectations compared to, what experience they have, because Pred, APAC guy, you don't really know how he'll play compared to the CDL players. Sib had been a substitute, but had mostly been in challengers. And then Accuracy and Mac were, coming off of difficult years where Mac was kind of on the edge of getting benched a few times by New York. Accuracy was benched by Minnesota. So, the idea of this roster was a little weird, but they started off really well. They won their first three CDL matches this season, and then they lost 10 of their next 13. And since then, they've won 8 consecutive matches and have a major title. So I think we saw it with LAG. LAG had a really hot run, and they won the major, and now they kind of stink again. I don't know if that's the same with Seattle. I believe a little bit more in Seattle, because I saw, more potential from them earlier in the season when they were losing a bunch of matches than I did with LAG. But I think consistency is the main thing. They're not going to keep winning every single match. Like, that's probably not going to happen. But if they can, win 60-70% of their matches, I think they're in a very good spot. And with this win, they're very high in the standings now. So their spot, like, they're not really in as much danger of missing champs as they could have been had they performed poorly at the major.
And that's the big thing. I think this obviously, like, end of the day, you want to make sure you're competing at champs, because champs is champs. It's the most important tournament, yada yada. But especially in a game like Vanguard, which we've kind of already talked about a couple times, it seems like anything can really happen here. You want to do whatever it takes to give yourself a chance to have that opportunity to win the big one at the end of the year, especially and this year more so than others. I feel like, just because of, I don't want to say the fluky nature, but we'll just say the nature of Vanguard, and how it seemingly feels like a lot of stuff is up in the air in terms of who's able to win on what day and all that. So that is super important. They're now in third place. Seattle is, in terms of CDL points. So 8th place right now is 120. They have 175. So it would take, they have a decent cushion. I think they announced during the broadcast that FaZe has qualified
Yes, they have.
for champs, and they're the only one. So like, obviously the other 7 spots for champs are still up in the air technically. But like you said, Seattle put themselves in a good position with this win for the biggest one of the year, which is something, we didn't even see from them last year. It really started at Major 5 last year, right? With the Nicky D series, they're eliminating Atlanta.
Yep.
That was basically their champs, because after they I think it was OpTic, they lost to OpTic Chicago. The match after that, they were eliminated and their season was over. So as of now, it seems like we could have Seattle at champs.
Let's go through the standings real quick and talk about each of the teams that we really want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about FaZe, because I don't know if you saw it, but the drama of aBeZy supposedly not being a good practice player. This was Tupac, their S&D coach's girlfriend, said that, quote, aBeZy doesn't want to practice, doesn't show up to eights, doesn't try, and is trying to become a worse version of Dashy. So Dashy, he's getting a little bit of the crossfire here. But I mean, I memed it quite a bit this weekend, because FaZe made another major grand finals. aBeZy at certain points did very well, and I think he went 6-1 in one of the searches, and people were on the timeline just going at it. But I want to know what you think about this FaZe roster, and I don't really know what you could say about this specific thing, but like, do you think that this will cause a problem in the FaZe roster or with Tupac? If like, I personally don't have a problem with like coaches venting to their significant others. Like, that's that's kind of just natural, that people go home from work and they start complaining about stuff that happened at work. But what do you think about a coach's girlfriend going on her live stream and telling the world aBeZy not a good practice player?
Yeah, I thought that situation was kind of funny. But I will say, I feel like that's just been something. What I mean here is just the notion that aBeZy doesn't necessarily enjoy Vanguard as previous titles. I feel like we haven't heard it. One, we haven't heard it officially from him. And but even before this clip, I feel like it was just something that was talked about in the community beforehand. So I don't really know where that started, but I know I've heard it and seen it before. This clip even surfaced, and then this clip surfaces, and that's like the real first official time we're hearing something about it, in my, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it kind of like it's no secret that Vanguard just isn't like a
Good.
great game in the eyes of many people.
Yeah.
So like I wouldn't blame him necessarily if he's not enjoying the game. I don't think it should affect his practice. He's still a professional player at the end of the day. And obviously we don't know the ins and outs of the situation, all that. So I'm not saying it's affecting his practice, but like if he doesn't enjoy the game, like it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if he's not putting in that extra effort in like eights and ranked play and stuff. um I haven't looked at the ranked play, the leaderboard, in a while now because I'm still not working in my room. But um back when aBeZy was first really coming up in World War II, there was like I'm pretty sure he had like 2+ accounts in like the top 10 of the World War II ranked play leaderboard. And I would be very surprised if that was the case in Vanguard, just based on what we've heard, and what seems to be just a game that he doesn't enjoy as much. So that's just an example in my eyes of something that, could possibly be true from this situation. But I think at the end of the day, like it was obviously, for the sake of FaZe, it was slightly unfortunate that Katie Bedford decided to stay that on stream, and it could cause some internal drama. But these guys are all like super close, and I think even like they've been working with Tupac now for over a year, and I think they respect his search and destroy knowledge, just based on how much he's been able to help them in that mode since he's joined. Where I don't think this is going to be something crucial, but um, at the end of the day, I guess it could be a topic. But at the same time, even with this quote unquote lack of practice or lack of passion, however you want to put it, like FaZe still has 3 second place finishes in 3 tournaments. So take that for what you will, I guess.
Yeah, and I like we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, so it's hard to really say. Uh, it's it is clear that aBeZy hasn't been statistically as good this year as he was last year, but Atlanta is not as good this year as they were last year. So I think those two things kind of feed off of each other, and I don't know how much can be separated from like aBeZy's performance is causing FaZe to underperform relative to what they're expecting, because I mean no other team has made even 2 major grand finals, and they've made all 3 despite not winning them. So I don't know how much can actually be taken away from that. But I was stunned to see that she would say that. Not that Tupac would say it, but that it would be said publicly, because that just seems to be not a great move for anyone. And Simp in the post-match press conference, so this was like a day later, he said, unless you're involved, you don't really know what's going on, so people should keep their mouth shut. And I thought that was I mean, it could go both ways. It could be aimed at Katie Bedford. It also could be aimed at fans trying to think that they know more than they do. But I don't know. I'm interested to see how this story progresses, if it does. And maybe this will kind of, if it's true, or maybe if it's not, it'll light a fire under aBeZy and FaZe, that they'll be like, all right, screw it. Like, you don't think we practice hard enough, you don't think we're good enough, we're gonna show you kind of stuff. I don't know. Maybe that's how it'll be, but I'm very interested to see where this goes. But Faye is still, regardless if aBeZy's practicing or not, they're really, really good. They're first place in the league. Like you said, they're the only team so far to have qualified for the playoffs. They're 35 points ahead of OpTic, who are in second place. And OpTic, they had a disappointing result at the major, considering how, they came in with a 4-1 record in these last qualifying matches with ProLoot, who's been standing in for Illy for the past month or so. They end up getting 20 points from this major, which isn't anything to scoff at. Obviously, that's more than like Paris has this entire season. But like, I think it's the same exact amount. I don't want to be incorrect here, but yeah, OpTic, they expect to do well. Like, this is not a surprise to anyone, and they got top 6 here. They tied with Florida for 5th, 6th. What did you think of OpTic? I know that the circumstances aren't great because they're playing with the substitute, but did you expect more from them going into this major?
I mean, it's tough, right? Like you said, with the circumstances. And in heading into that first round matchup, I expected OpTic to still beat Florida, but thinking about it again, we like we already mentioned earlier in the show, we have seen Florida beat um, OpTic with Illy, so I'm not necessarily super surprised that Florida was able to come away with this victory. Then you see them drop down to the losers bracket, and they beat the Gorillas and London, both 3-0. If they had lost one of those matches, or if they weren't like convincing 3-0s, maybe that would have been like a slight red flag or something. But they beat those teams that they're supposed to beat. I mean, I guess you could say like OpTic fans expect them to beat every team, so that's kind of a not great phrasing on my part, but hopefully you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then they come up against the Thieves, and in our patented HBR classic, and the Thieves are just able to take that one. We can talk about the Thieves more. They're just kind of one of those teams where it's again, similar to Vanguard, you really don't know what you're going to get from them on any given day.
Mm-hmm.
See him earlier in the tournament take down the Rocker, who were the top seed heading into this event, and then they end up just getting absolutely smoked by FaZe and the winners bracket. I think there was a super quick series, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, overall, I guess any tournament where OpTic isn't in the finals is going to be a disappointment in the Green Wall's eyes, but they still are playing with a sub. I think this kind it is worth mentioning that there were people saying due to their success in the online qualifiers, like that they should keep ProLoot in the lineup even when Illy comes back. I think the performance at this major kind of, if there was any doubt to Illy coming back when he's ready, I think this kind of solidifies it. Like they didn't win the tournament with ProLoot. I think that's probably the only way we see ProLoot sticking in the lineup with Illy coming back, and even then it might have been up in the air still probably. I think that's the big picture here for OpTic is still second place in the CDL point standings, in a good position to qualify for champs, and they just want to not saying I am assuming they want to get Illy back fully healthy as soon as possible so they can prepare for Major 4 with him in a best case scenario, and in worst case scenario they just want him fully healthy for champs.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what OpTic does if he's not back and he returns after Major 4. Maybe he's not ready until after then, because then I believe New York had a similar issue last year where Clayster took his leave of absence. He missed, basically the final part of the season, the final major. They played with, I believe, 2 substitutes for that event, maybe just 1. I know that Decimate was there, but my exact details are a little bit hazy. But I remember that he missed the last part of the season, and then he came back for champs. and it was we had this conversation about whether like how the chemistry of that team would be affected, practicing several weeks without Clayster, and then okay, he's back now. We're gonna play with him. I don't know if that's the same thing with OpTic. Obviously, the chemistry that Illy I think has built up with this group of players. They won the first major. They've been one of the best teams in the league. I think that he deserves a chance to come back and play, especially if he's ready. We don't really know if he is, but I think that regardless, Proloot, he played pretty well, all things considered. It's a tough position to come in. But I think they played well. Like they lose to LAT, but they lost to LAT with Illy, so it's not the end of the world. And Florida has been up and down all season. I think I might even said before this event, like I wouldn't be surprised if Florida beats OpTic because I wasn't picking Florida for that series because like that's what Florida does. Like I think it's the way their roster is constructed that they're just it's all over the place and there's really no way to consistently predict how they're going to do. But yeah, I think that OpTic has a very good chance to win the championship, just like FaZe, especially if Illy comes back. I think that it's kind of hard not to put them like in the top two at that point of like the contenders for the championship.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about LAT because you mentioned them. They are currently in 8th place, so they're 10 points ahead of Minnesota and Florida, who are tied for 9th place. This was actually kind of a big event for them because they finished with 30 points at the major, which was the highest that they've had this season because they got 20 points in the first major and 10 points in the second major. This actually... they had a little bit of a run. They beat Minnesota, which was a huge surprise considering Minnesota's coming in with an undefeated record, the only undefeated team in the last qualifying matches. We talked about how they got smoked by FaZe, which not terribly surprising. They beat OpTic in the HBR Classic, and then they lose to Toronto, who were on that incredible losers bracket run. This is just how LAT is. They're kind of like Florida. They have the potential, or they've shown that they might have the potential to be something greater, but every time that people expect something out of them, they turn out to be the team that they have been for the past 2 or 3 months. Even with this roster or the role swap, excuse me, it doesn't seem like there's a huge difference between LAT of old and LAT of new. I think that they're a middle of the road team, which is incredibly disappointing considering how talented that roster is. Like if you look at it on paper, they should be higher than they are, but I think they're just maybe a 6, 7, and I think an 8 seed is very it's very fitting for them at the moment. Maybe currently they might be better than 8th because Boston, who's ahead of them, has played pretty poorly recently. But I can't say that they're much higher than 8th right now.
No, I agree with that for the most part. I would have to sit down and think about rankings for a long time. But yeah, I agree with the notion that they're a middle of the pack team right now, and really like the tournament bracket and how you were saying it, like it just goes to show like that they win a good series, then they lose one. I mean, you can't really take much from a loss to FaZe, in my opinion. Like I expect FaZe to win that match. Then they get another solid win there against OpTic, which for the position they've been in, like that's a big win. And they come off and they lose to a hot Toronto team, going on a run there through the losers bracket, playing at their home event. So yeah, I mean, they at the end of the day they go 2-2 in matches at this tournament, and that just goes to show like middle of the pack team, like they weren't necessarily dominating, but it was important for the points, like you said. That they had a placing like this, so it's really going to come down to these major four qualifiers and major four for them. If they, I don't, in my eyes, I'm not really sure if they're like turning a corner or anything like that, but like obviously this is the time they're gonna have to do it if If they don't plan on making a roster change and continue to stick with this lineup heading into the last chunk of qualifiers and all that, and they're going to have to put up and really try to prove some people wrong.
Yeah, they have at least they have an advantage, I guess, going into this final quarter, but it's a very slim margin right now. And if Minnesota, if they're able to kind of replicate the success they had in the online matches last time, maybe they win 4 or 5 matches. Those are much needed points that could go a long way, even if they don't do particularly well in the final major. Florida, who knows what they're going to do in New York and Paris right now. So New York is in 11th place, 50 points back of 8th place. Paris is all but eliminated at this point. They're 100 points back of 8th place. The maximum number of points that Paris could earn in the final quarter of the season is 115. So they have to be pretty much perfect and rely on these 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 teams doing really poorly to ensure that they could get a spot. Considering they've won 2 total matches this season, I don't have a lot of faith that they'll rattle off like 8 consecutive wins, but I guess it is possible, and they haven't been officially eliminated from playoff contention as of this moment. But yeah, New York, they're the much more possible scenario for them. They're only 50 points back. That's a good winner, or that's a good qualifying match run, and maybe a few wins in the major. Maybe LAT choke. They go 0-5 in qualifying matches again. They don't do well in a major. It's all possible for New York. It's not that likely with everything that's going on, but yeah, this was a very disappointing result for New York because they won the Pro-Am Classic. Unfortunately, no points were tied to that event. So, they got that money, which is obviously an incredible thing, but they weren't able to advance in the standings, which, leads to the CDL championship or the CDL playoff qualification. And I don't know if they could, if they're going to be able to do it. It's going to be a very difficult road for them, considering. So this is their 3rd major in which they have not earned a single point. They have not won a single match at any of the 3 majors so far.
That's wild.
Yeah, even Paris has won a match at the major. So I don't know what do you think went wrong for New York in this major? Considering how well people thought they might do, considering their Pro-Am Classic. Their Pro-Am Classic win.
I really don't have a good answer for that, to be honest. Like, they play Seattle in the first round of the winner's bracket, right? And Seattle ends up winning the whole tournament. So, like, in hindsight, that might not be a terrible loss. But then they drop down to the loser's bracket and fall to London. And I'm looking at this series, and like I really don't even remember it, to be honest with you. But like that's just one, like you especially with the current state of London, just they haven't looked strong recently. I think most people were expecting New York to take that one, so that's the bigger surprise for me.
Yeah, and I looked at it. So I'm counting the Pro-Am Classic and their qualifying, their most recent qualifying matches. New York were 15-3 in hardpoint. At one point, they were the worst hardpoint team in the entire league, and for them to go 15-3 in 18 hardpoint maps is honestly incredible. And then the major, small sample size, but they went 1-3 in hardpoint against London, Seattle. Seattle is a decent hardpoint team. London to this point hadn't really showed anything that they were particularly great. They've been slipping down the standings since basically Major 2. They just haven't been able to find their footing with Harry in the roster. But I'm just like, and obviously Subliners, they lost all 3 search and destroys at the major as well. So, when you're losing all of your maps, I guess you're not going to win many matches. But I don't know what New York can do. I don't know what's going on with them, but it is a really bad time to kind of, lose your mojo and lose whatever momentum you had coming into the back half of the season.
Agreed. And I will just say real quick too, like obviously you said it's not impossible, but it's going to take a really strong Major Four qualifiers and Major Four. Like obviously, you mentioned them not winning at any majors yet. Like that just can't happen at Major Four if they have any hopes of making champs. And that would be, in a larger picture here. New York not making champs would be very unexpected, I feel like, just due to the roster they had coming into the season. And just off the top of my head, it would have to be the first champs that Crim Six doesn't compete in since, well, it would have to be the first champs that he hasn't competed in, because he did compete in Black Ops 2 champs with TP, Aches, and Too Quick. So it would be since COD XP. I don't know if he competed in that, but I'm pretty sure he was still playing in Halo and when COD XP was there, like before Black Ops 2. So I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure if New York doesn't make champs, this would be the first champs without Krim, which is just kind of weird to think about.
Yeah, so he didn't compete at COD XP,
Yeah.
and he has competed in all of the rest. Yep. So, I mean, he's one of, if not the greatest Call of Duty player of all time. Him not getting a chance, at least to, I mean, I guess he's having a chance right now to qualify, but it would suck not to have him there. Same with Clayster. I don't think that Clayster will get picked up by a CDL roster this late in the season, but I want to see these players be able to have that opportunity to get to, a fourth world title, which would just be amazing. But there's still hope for both of them, I guess. Less probably for Clayster, but New York, they just have to do their thing, and maybe they'll get that hometown boost when they get to the major, like
True.
Toronto did. The fourth and final major is in Brooklyn, and it'd be cool to see New York be able to defend their home turf. But we'll see about that. Any other teams that you're itching to talk about? As we wind down in the show.
I will just to make sure we go through the standings completely. So we mentioned FaZe, first place, CDL points 260. OpTic we talked about. They're in second at 225. We've talked a ton about Seattle now, but just to clarify their position, they're at 175 in third place in the standings. And just this middle chunk of the order is just really interesting to me. You have London in fourth at 150. Toronto in fifth at 140, and Boston in sixth at 130. And like that, we kind of hinted at it earlier in the show tonight, but it's just that goes to show how important Toronto's run in the losers bracket this event was. Really, we haven't hit on it too much, but in particular, they did end up losing to FaZe twice at this event, but they lose to them in the first round. Then they go down. They beat Paris, Minnesota, Florida, and the Thieves. So they win 4 matches there to get a nice chunk of CDL points and kind of boost them up a little bit. They've had they still have shown flashes of that strong roster we saw last year that can contend for titles. But I think this was the best they've looked, in my opinion, at least recently. So that was certainly worth mentioning in my eyes. And then the other two teams, just London and Boston, like their positions in the top of the standings, that just goes to show how important the entire season as a whole is. Like we always get to these points where we're looking at the like scenarios of teams that are outside of the champs picture trying to get in. And that just, Boston and London, Boston in particular more recently, London kind of a little more than just recently. But both of those teams have had struggles, and they're in a position to still potentially qualify for champs due to having strong performances earlier in the season despite current struggles. So just wanted to highlight where they're at right now. And then you have the Gorillas in 7th at 125. that 5 there could be important at the end because obviously they get the 65 points for winning Major 2. And that kind of like that obviously is the 5 points is the difference between 7th and 8th right now. So that could go a long way in terms of tiebreakers. Like if Gorillas continue to struggle as well, and they are able to edge out, like say they are in that fifth place or sorry the 8th place spot. Um, I'll just give them 135 for a sake of example, and then the Rocker win 2 matches or whatever, and they're at 130, and that's how the season just ends right there. Like then Gorillas are getting that last spot at champs just based off of that 5 point difference from winning the major. So as opposed to being a team like the Thieves who have an even number at 120, there's the potential for tiebreakers and all those situations. So that's certainly worth keeping an eye on, in my opinion, as well.
Definitely. If the season were to end today, the 4 teams that would not make the playoffs are the Minnesota Rocker, Florida Mutineers, New York Subliners, and Paris Legion. Minnesota and Florida have really, really good chances to still make it. They're only 10 points back from LAT, who are in 8th, and like you said, they're 15 points back from LAG. If I'm a LAG fan, I am not feeling comfortable even with that 5-point bump because they've done they were really, really bad in both the qualifying matches and in the major. In the third round. That's like at least Minnesota, they had a disappointing result at the major, but they won 5 qualifying matches. That's 50 points. That is a good way to get into the top 8. LAT hit and miss, but they've consistently been able to find at least a few wins usually at the major, or maybe they even go 3-2 in the qualifying matches. LAG are in a really tough spot where if they don't show up in these qualifying matches, it might be the end of their season. And this is when it comes down to instead of last year where teams basically their schedules were based on how they were performing in the CDL at the majors and everything. These matches that are going into the last set of qualifying matches, those schedules are set. So certain teams will have a more difficult time in this last set of qualifying matches than others. I'm looking at Boston right now. Boston plays OpTic and they play LAT in their first 2 qualifying matches in the first week. LAG, they play Toronto and New York, so could see maybe one win there. I think we can count out Paris, but Paris has a relatively like an easier schedule because they don't have FaZe on their roster. They do have OpTic, so that might be the one that cuts them out of contention for the playoffs. But these schedules have been there for the entire season, and it's going to be difficult for a lot of these teams to overcome the scheduling of it, and that they were going to play a tougher final 5 matches than some of these other teams that they're 5, 10, 15 points. There's only that much difference between them. Do you have anything else before we get on out of here? I think we should mention the Modern Warfare 2 reveal is tomorrow. So I guess today, whenever you're listening to this, June 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can tune in, I believe, on the YouTube channel for Call of Duty. I believe that's where they're doing it. But hopefully we'll hear something competitive related, or maybe just something good. I don't know. Like maybe just more and fun maps. Maybe that's what will make me happy as far as being a competitive fan. What do you expect, or what do you want to see from the reveal tomorrow?
I have absolutely no hopes and expectations for it. I do not want to get excited and fall into the loop that several people have where, they just get super excited about the new Call of Duty coming out, and recent products have not led me to be super excited about the new game. So I'm going in with an open mind. I'm hoping to be and somehow just be blown away, but not expecting that at all. But regardless, I am excited to watch the reveal. I don't think we're gonna get too much out of it. Um, but whatever they have to show is better than nothing. So I'll take it. And end of the day, I'm still gonna buy the game and play it either way. But I just hope that we get something positive tomorrow.
Well, Attach said that it was probably the best Call of Duty game of all time,
Yeah.
so he would not lead us astray.
No, absolutely not.
Prediction scores. So I didn't have a great weekend, mostly because Florida sucks and they keep screwing me over. But you went 11-7. I went 8-10. So you have a 3-match advantage this season in predictions. I maybe will need to stop picking Florida to keep up with you. Make sure to subscribe or follow the feed wherever you're listening to your podcast. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, so pretty much everywhere. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter. He's at jbink with 2 Ks. I'm at Preston Byers. And the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. The next show, tentatively scheduled for June 14th. We'll see. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. That's when you'll be able to figure it out if, when we're doing it. We also have a little bit of a break in the CDL schedule. We have like a 2.5 week break until the start of these next set of qualifying matches. We might take a break next week. We might not. I think I've been getting into more of a groove because it's harder for me when we don't do it for 2 to 3 weeks. It's hard for me to get back on and just even talk to somebody for an hour. So we might do one next week, and maybe we have more of a, an open style where we're just talking about something else. Maybe the Modern Warfare 2 reveal is great and we have a lot to talk about. Or there's roster changes. Possibly we're going down to the end of the season. There's a chance that Paris Legion will execute that trade for Scump and Shotzi, and they'll be able to make a turnaround and get to the CDL playoffs and never count them out. I don't think we actually talked about it, though, that Paris is moving to Vegas. So
that would have happened that happened the day after the show last week, right?
Yeah, so I guess just mentioned it like the Paris Legion ownership group. They also have the Paris Eternal Overwatch League team. Both of those teams are being relocated to Las Vegas next season. So in 2023, there will be the Vegas Legion in the Call of Duty League. I don't think that logo really fits with the Vegas theme. It's very much a French thing. But I think we should have mentioned that probably a little bit earlier, but I forgot to put it in the notes, and I just forgot about it until now. But Viva Las Vegas, I guess.
Yeah, that's a cool. We can end on that, but we've talked about Paris and their approach as an organization and all that ad nauseum now. But moving forward, I think this just opens up more possibilities for I went to the Vegas event in IW, and even though it was IW, that was a super cool event. Just it was my first time in Vegas. But that's just a cool city for events and stuff like that. So hopefully COVID and the world opening up, all that, like having an event in Vegas again would be pretty cool. But we've talked about like Paris. Like one thing I myself in particular had talked about like with the Paris brand was that like I felt if they're not going to compete right now and they're going to continue to struggle with results, I felt like they were in a position where they should have like tapped into that like French fan base and tried to grow the brand that way by like signing some French players. But now that's basically out the window. So I know Silly is from Vegas, but I don't think that's like going to play a factor. And
I don't think so.
I would be, yeah. but I still think just a move to Vegas opens up some possibilities for the organization, as well as, or as long as at the end of the day they're willing to spend the money to try and make some moves and try and make a splash in a new location next year.
Yeah, I DM'd Temp to see what he thought of it. He gave me 3 fire emojis about the move to Vegas. So, I mean, I think he's excited about it. I personally feel like this is a great move for the Legion. Even if they suck next year, it's a lot better to suck in Vegas than it is to Paris when you're not even in Paris. It'd be different if the team was actually located in France, but they're not. They're in like Texas or North Carolina or something. So like I think that it's a good move to come stateside. I don't know how often the CDL was going to run events in Paris, and I think it's much more likely that Las Vegas is a destination for a CDL event than Paris was. So I think an overall good move for the Paris, soon to be Vegas Legion.
Agreed.
But yeah, that does it for me. Take it away, Bink.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show. Also, hope you enjoyed the major as much as I did. Most certainly, action-packed weekend of Call of Duty. So we do, as Preston mentioned, we do have a little bit of a break. The qualifying matchups for Major 4 don't start until June 24th. So we will, as long as we have something to talk about, it sounds like we're going to try and do a show next week, but that's up in the air right now. So you're just going to have to follow us on Twitter and stay up to date with us to find out when the next episode will be exactly. But other than that, thank you guys for tuning in, and always remember to send the chow.